Hi everybody, welcome to our first lecture for our leadership theory course. This is the first chapter in the Nordhaus book. It is Introduction to Leadership. One thing before we start, my hope is that when you watch the lecture video, you have your PowerPoints in front of you, either in hard copy form or maybe up on your desktop while you're watching the video, because sometimes the text doesn't pick up all the way. But one of the things that I had to do here, because I'm in a room that isn't that conducive to recording right now, I had to change the background. So the background that you see here is not the same background that is on the PowerPoints that all of you have in D2L. Just letting you know that. So this is the first course for most of you in the master's program at Oklahoma State University. This is here to give you a foundation for leadership to really help you develop your own organizational leadership platform. If you are going to pursue a doctorate, this is going to be one of the most important courses for all of you because it's going to introduce you to these topics, it's going to explain them to you, it's going to delve in a little bit to what the topics are, how you can use them and apply them as a leader yourself, but more importantly, how you can see the leadership styles of the people that are above you and see what elements they represent in their leadership style. One thing that I said in the introductory video, and I'm going to stress again, this is not a book to read page by page. I don't see the point of that. I see the point of you reading and really knowing the literature on a few of the topics that are in this textbook. So but those are different to everybody. So if you pick up on something that you think, wow, this is interesting, great, then you should probably read it. But I actually would watch the videos and go to the lecture first without having read the book. So unlike other classes where I might say, please read before you come to class, I am never going to say that in this class. Same with the weeks that we have the online courses, which are about half of them. I would rather you watch the video first, get an understanding of what we're trying to say related to leadership styles, and then if it appeals to you, then you go back and you read the chapter. That's the approach that I want you to take for this class, and I think it's going to be the most beneficial to all of you. So, recently, administration at OSU changed the structure of this course to be for individuals interested in preschool to 12 education only. And this really hasn't been done before in the way that this course has been taught. We used to open it up to people that were higher education, and they could take the class as well. So we would teach the leadership styles, but we wouldn't relate it to schools. Now, officially, we are going to be relating this to schools. So Nordhaus doesn't do that, but I will. So I'll take the leadership styles and I will say, this works in schools because, this doesn't work in schools because, and that'll be a consistent theme throughout our lectures. I would read the first chapter, and I do want to stress that this is probably going to be one of the longer lectures in the course just because it hits on so many important topics related to leadership. So about the author, Nordhaus is an emeritus professor from Western Michigan University, but look what he is in. He's from the School of Communication, and I think that's pertinent because we're using it in an education class. It's an amazing book. He's authored multiple books on leadership. I used a different version of this text when I taught this class at Point Park. I did a business leadership class, and I used one that was more for business. But his focus is in health communications. So the reason being why this is an important book is because the leadership theories in it are meant for you to decide, is this me, is this not me, and develop them into your own. And that's one of the main assignments for the course and why we have this course anyway. So obviously we don't have discussion involved because this is an online week, but one of the things that I would ask you would be, what does a good leader look like? Take a minute and think about that. What are the leaders in your organization that you say, that's a good leader? What are the traits that you think a good leader displays? Think about the best leader you've ever worked with, what made them good, and why you learned from them. My guess is that these are leaders that you feel similar to, that remind you of yourself, or that you aspire to be. Most of the time, leadership comes out of good leadership. There are some times, though, where leadership comes out of bad leadership, and there's a great text by Kellerman that goes over bad leadership. Think about the bad leaders in your organization or bad leaders that you've worked with. What are their traits? What would have the bad leaders done really to stand out as bad leaders? And I would argue, in this case, these are people that you don't want to be, or in some cases, very rarely in a class, we'll get one or two people that say, I want to be a leader because I hate so-and-so and I want to do a better job than them. Is that an appropriate answer? Well, yeah, it is, but bad leaders can inspire you too. Most of the time it's a good leader, but a bad leader can inspire you too. And you can adjust your style to basically not do what they do. So why does leadership matter? Why is it important? Does it make a difference in an organization? Well, obviously it does. It keeps employees motivated, it keeps production up, and it keeps people understanding their sense of purpose. I ask a question and I ask, what types of organizations does leadership seem to mean more in? One of the things you're going to have to investigate in this class, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, is this notion of, the doing good school. The doing good school is your above average school. It's the one that hasn't changed demographic populations at all. It's the one that has stayed relatively constant. Very little turnover at the administrative levels, either at central office or the building levels. And leadership is just kind of there. The teachers know their expectations, they know what they're supposed to do. Other organizations, ones that are either performing at a very, very, very high level or a very, very, very low level, leadership is even more critical. Because those are organizations that are constantly under the gun, either for positive reasons or for negative reasons. And when we look at organizations like that, it's important that you understand the leadership processes and where they're coming from, who's directing them. That's important. Is it coming from another administrator, or is it coming from the state? And ways that that leadership is being trickled down to the teaching staff and even to the clerical staff as well. So, the questions that I would ask, does the leadership matter in downtown Stillwater Walmart, the American Red Cross building in Tulsa, Schwartz Elementary School in Oklahoma City, Buettner Elementary in Cromwell, or the Antique Mall in Enid? Some of these places, I think leadership matters more. And I think there are circumstances when leadership matters more in some contexts than it normally does. I say this coming from the perspective as an elementary school administrator and a public school teacher that taught high school. The position of the high school principal is probably the position that has the most dealings with leadership activities in any school organization. And I don't say that to downplay the elementary school principals. I was an elementary school administrator. But that role isn't one that has the prominence and public relations issues that the high school principal does. So when you look at schools and you look at organizations, the high school principals, they have more in terms of leadership that they're responsible for and that could impact them in their job as well. So leadership in the principalship really is nothing more than a revolving door. Most of you have probably had multiple principals in your building. The average principal in the United States lasts about 4.6, 4.7 years as a building principal. They use it as a trajectory position across the United States. It's what it's looked upon as. And it is the case in Oklahoma. We have 500 plus school districts, so the principalship is a trajectory position. It is what it is. You're entering a position that's middle management, it's trajectory, and you can use it to go to different districts. So keep that in mind. So how do you enter the principalship? What are the key ways to get in? Well, my opinion is you perform well in the district that you're currently in, an opening happens, and you're at the right place at the right time. Timing is everything. Is it different for elementary school leaders than middle school or high school leaders? Yeah, it really is. Because at the high school level, if you're performing well, the odds of you landing an assistant principal position are much, much greater from the teaching ranks to be internally promoted. Same with the middle school level as well. Elementary schools in this state, as all of you know, are fairly different. Because the elementary school leaders, normally they don't get assistant principals. So it has to be somebody that has proven themselves in a leadership capacity already. Maybe as a teacher leader, maybe as a special ed teacher, maybe as a reading specialist, who becomes an elementary school principal, and then they transition into other roles within the district. When I asked what qualities aspiring principals must have in each grade level configuration, we're going to talk a lot about this, but think about what makes an elementary principal unique, what makes a middle school principal unique, and what makes a high school principal unique. It's going to be a big key point to come back to in all of our discussion. So Nordhaus really talks about the eras of leadership. I want you to pay attention to this section as you read this chapter, but I've done research on the eras of the principalship. So I'm going to present my research that was part of my dissertation that isn't in Nordhaus, but this links Nordhaus to the principalship. And that's really the point of these PowerPoint slides. I'm taking the Nordhaus content and I'm making it pertinent to people that are going to be school principals. So you're looking at this style and then I'm framing it in a way that principals can see it. So that's kind of the point of this. If you have any suggestions on some of this, I'm certainly open to it. So 1900 to 1929, we had control and centralization of power. Leadership was basically used as a control mechanism. For this, if you take supervision of instruction, you're going to learn early on in that class that basically supervision was to inspect and it was to control as well. Leadership was really more than anything else to make sure that people were doing what they were supposed to be doing, and to really have obedience and respect. Think about the time frame. This was the 1900s to the 1930s. Historically, this was significant. We had a growth in factory work. We had a growth in industry. We were getting ready to enter another war. So that version of leadership using as a fear mechanism shouldn't surprise anybody. It's pretty expected. The trait approach to leadership really showed that it was based more on focus from controlled influence rather than domination, meaning that there are specific characteristics that people have that make them a good leader, and these are traits that they have. People start to realize now at this time that they can influence a leader, meaning that you, in your position, can influence somebody that's in a leadership role, help them be a better leader, but also advance your own agenda as well. So the group approach to leadership, 1940s, really saying that this is an individual directing group activities. Think historically, World War II. Would group approaches be necessary? Think about just even the formation of the Army and the Navy in World War II. Think about all of the skills that the military had to have in order to operate. If I was teaching an introduction to technology class, I'd talk about the ENIAC, which was the first computer that was ever invented, and it was used by the military for ballistic placement. It required cooperation from everybody involved that were in the computer room and on the battleship to know where to fire a missile to hit the intended target. That required cooperation. It required somebody to be a leader and to communicate between ship and control room and computer room. So that approach to leadership, group, should not surprise you here because it's really what was common at the time. So 1950s, we really went with shared goals and effective leadership. So we just expanded on what was being done in the 40s. We looked at leadership really where there were shared goals that organizations needed to have, and effective leadership really showed, could you influence the group to achieve said goals? I would argue, and I have, that this is the birth of strategic planning in schools. This is when people basically say, here's an effective goal, here are our targets, and we want to meet these targets. So this was really the birth of strategic planning in our school environments. So leadership is a behavior. Leadership is used to influence others in a particular direction, can be good or bad. Once again, social justice movement, 1960s. Big idea in terms of American history where behaviors and traits were very important in how you acted and presented yourself as a leader really stood for who you were and how others followed you and the influence that you had. So organizational behavior and leadership, most of my research comes out of this, really saying that different organizations have different ways in which leadership emerges and benefits the organization. Some organizations, leadership is critical. In some organizations, it's the most critical thing. If I supervise you for your principal internships, I'm really interested in seeing how you adjust your leadership style to meet the needs of your organization. Because once again, we are in a state with 500 plus school districts, meaning that leadership in one district is going to be much different than leadership in the other, and you have to keep that in mind. So in the 80s was when we had the explosion of leadership research. The main idea is leadership should do whatever the leader wants to do. So I explain this is the concept of having your own idea and making others think that it's their idea. So basically what I mean by this is you want to advance a new curricular goal in your district. So you have 5 principals underneath you, you're the superintendent. You go to 1 or 2 of them and you discuss it, or you send them to trainings on that curriculum. They come back, they're excited about it. They share it with the other 3 principals. Then you have 5 principals on the same page that are talking about this idea, saying, wow, we should be doing common planning time in all of our buildings. What was really your idea in the first place, but you did it in a way that you passed it down the pipe and you gave it to somebody else. That's good. And that really is this idea of doing what the leader wishes and making others see those ideas. So leadership is still defined as how to influence others, but now it's used transformationally, meaning we're involving everybody from the ground up in those procedures. So transformational leadership. All of you, when defining your leadership style, will refer to your leadership as something, but I would say 50% say transformational leadership. What does that mean? When you hear that term, what do you think transformational leadership means? What does research say transformational leadership looks like? Most of the time it involves organizational culture. It involves making a major change to structure, making a major change to personnel, making a major change to curriculum. You've taken something and you've changed it in a way that it benefits others and it reduces the achievement gap between people of lower socioeconomic status. That's what transformational leadership looks like and how it is normally defined in leadership literature. So this is something that you certainly can consider as well. So 21st century leadership, basically this is saying that there's lots of different types of leadership and you're going to find one in this course that matches your own definition of leadership. We need to realize that leadership is complex. There are different ways to look at it, and some of these styles need different interpretations. So I've done eras of researching the principalship. My research is on schools as organizations, but in order to push that through, you have to understand the historical concepts of the principalship to better understand what an organization is and what an organization is capable of doing. So we're going to visit a little bit of this. This isn't in the textbook, but this is linking Nordhaus to the text into the principalship, which is kind of what I want to do. One of the concepts that I'm going to be talking about a lot in this class also is levels of abstraction. This is when you think only of your inner circle and not looking at external contexts. For school principals, a lot of the time, they exist to tell war stories, and I've learned this from teaching doctoral classes. They are telling war stories. They are saying, you know, this is what happens in my building, my organization. But if you do that and you think in terms of that and you don't understand the organizations that are all around you, that can be a major problem if you jump organizations. So I think about Bronfenbrenner, and if you were an early childhood person like myself, you would remember Bronfenbrenner. This was basically the Bronfenbrenner ecological systems theory where we had the meso, macro, micro system. In basically the things that were in your inner circle were what influenced you the most, and then you would expand out. School principals tend to stay in that inner circle. Don't get caught up in that, because what happens if you leave your district? I can't say that enough, and try to think about that as we look at the material in this course. So the foundations of the principalship came in the 1800s and the 1900s. It came out of necessity. The initial principals basically rang a bell, made sure the school day worked properly, and disciplined students. They were the most experienced teacher in the building, and they were basically made to be the principal. They rang the bell, opened the opened the school, walked around, made sure everything was okay, kept the students in line. It was a ceremonial role more than anything else. That was the way the principalship was for